culture eats porridge for breakfast. I'm Scottish, so I thought get something in there about porridge. You'll all have heard the Drucker statement, so I'm not going to repeat that for you. But this is all about how we can sustain behavioural change in agile transformation. So a little bit about me first. So this is me. I love the outdoors. I live in central Scotland. I've been renovating a 300-year-old farmhouse with my wife for the last 10 years. I have dogs. I'm a Scottish rugby fan. It's not the easiest job in the world. I love to cook, as you can probably tell. And these are some of the things that amuse me. My favourite film and something that makes me laugh. And I also do some Agile stuff. I got into Agile in 2005, and I've been coaching for over 10 years now. So I've been in and out of a fair number of organisations. The final thing is cardboard boxes. I'm surrounded with them. I've just moved house. If you hear some echo, it's because I'm in a pretty empty room. So my apologies for that. And also another learning is don't agree to give a talk the week you move house. It's been rather frenetic. Anyway, moving on. What am I going to cover? What is organisational culture? Very briefly. This is only a 20-minute talk, but I'll give you a high level of what I think this is. Can we change it? That's a key thing to all of this. The benefits of porridge, naturally. Incentives and consensus are two of the things I'd like to focus on particularly. Nudge theory is something that I've been looking into recently, and it's something that I think leaders can benefit from in trying to implement behavioural change. And some of the things that leaders can do specifically and in this environment to help sustain the behavioural change. So, first up, what is Agile transformation? I'm not a big fan of the Agile transformation thing, because transformation for me implies this picture, a start state and an end state, whereas I think what we're trying to do with Agile companies or implementing change towards more agility in companies is we're actually changing the way the company changes. I thought about this myself this week in the lead up to this, and I came up with this, a shift in organizational culture to become an adaptive and a learning organization. So we're not changing a company from an X company to a Y company. We're helping a company, an organization, become more flexible, more adaptive, and become a learning organization. This is only my viewpoint. I'm sure some of you will have others, but I think that's the one I would go after. So, what's organizational culture, and can we change it? So, this is a model I first read up on about 7 years ago. It's by a couple called Deal and Kennedy. They wrote this paper in 1982 where they spoke about organizational culture, and they broke it down pretty easily to 4 quadrants. So the quadrants were based on whether the acceptable levels of risk a company has, and also the speed of feedback that a company has. So for example, high level of risk and a low speed of feedback is aircraft manufacturers and oil companies. These are all Deal and Kennedy's words, these are not mine. The idea being, if you're drilling for oil, if you get it right, you could really succeed. If you fail, you can get huge failure, and your speed of feedback is very, very low. Similarly, tough guy or macho companies, or tough guy or macho organizations rather, like the police, like surgeons, like sports people, they tend to be far faster feedback. If you get something wrong, you can see it immediately. But also the risks when you get that thing wrong are higher. What we tend to be doing, I think, in Agile transformations is changing organizations which have low risk appetite and low speed of feedback. These tend to be banks, insurance companies, large old style organizations, if you like. We're trying to keep the low risk levels for them because that's imperative to their business, and move them to high feedback, high speed of feedback organizations. Work hard, play hard. Software companies do this. Roland's just given a perfect example of Fluidly. Very, very fast feedback on what they're doing. And low risk because of the amount of testing and all that sort of thing they do. So what we're trying to do is move large organizations more into that. So can we change culture? I don't actually think we can. However, what Dale Kennedy also said was something that I really, really like, which is culture can be defined as the way we do things around here. And for me, that's something we can change. We can change the way we do things around here. What we're trying to do is change the companies from an old-fashioned, contract-based, waterfall-type system to a more iterative and incremental system of delivery. So we're shortening their feedback loops. And that way, we try to move the company to a more adaptive and learning way of working. So the challenge with that, there are many. Existing culture is always resistant to change. It's the way it is. And these examples are things that I've actually heard in various companies over the years. So, for example, the finance department saying, but we've already agreed the budget for the next 3 years. So how can you possibly make a change that results in something external to your company? And governance, detailed requirements need to be signed off before we can start development. So we can't move with more conversational user stories. We can't, we have to have a large delay before we actually start coding. Similarly, PMO, we have to have your milestones for the next 12 months before we can release any funding. And I've genuinely heard all of these statements in other companies. But one of the things we really need to remember is it doesn't make these areas bad or unhelpful. It's simply currently the way we do things around here. This is their culture that they've been rewarded for potentially years. And we need to be quite aware of that. Behavioural changes are also hard, and interestingly, the reason I asked Shabir a question about time was because I knew what was coming here, because these are things I've heard. We're too busy to spend 2 hours on our retro, so we're only going to spend 30 minutes. That's people fighting almost the need to be a learning organisation. I can't, and this was actually the same company, I can't possibly convey to the team what I want in 15 minutes, so we're moving our daily stand-up to 30 minutes. And this is all about culture pushing back on behaviours. User stories drift into becoming requirements with no associated conversations. No stakeholders attend the reviews, so we're writing RAG reports. So stakeholders aren't going to look at the work, they're expecting RAG reports. And I know Shabir mentioned reporting as well, and while some of it is useful, a lot of it is also waste. And finally, we have a tight deadline, so I'm just going to tell everybody what I need them to work on. That removes any kind of autonomy from both the teams and the personnel involved. And that's an impact on how your culture functions, how your people function. And the end result in this is the rubber band effect. I know many of you will have heard of this. You stretch the rubber band so far, but the minute you let go, it springs back. And the point is, how can we get around this? And the only way we can get around this effectively is by support and the reinforcement of behavioural changes that will enable us to shift the culture. We need to constantly say, we need to keep these behaviours in line. We need to keep presenting the same behaviours, because if we don't, the rubber band will snap straight back the minute we stop reinforcing them. So, how can we do this? This is the porridge bit. So, this lady here is my grandmother, and she was involved in a study done by Edinburgh University when she was in her late 80s, clearly not this picture, on how she remained so fit and well into her late life. I can't honestly tell you what the university ended up saying, but what my grandma always used to say was, it's because she ate a bowl of porridge every single day. Not once a week, not once in a while. She ate a bowl of porridge every single day. There's obviously a question around, did the porridge actually help? But the truth is, if she hadn't eaten it, would we have known? We can't tell. But it's that repetition and that reinforcement that we have to think about when we're looking at behavioural change. It has to be constant. It has to be repetitive. And here's the key to it. It's not me, it's you. I would obviously say these things. I'm an Agile coach. But to be truly effective, these messages need to come from leadership. The leadership of an organisation at all levels has to reinforce these behaviours. And I'm going to talk through just a wee bit on maybe some things we can do to help with that. So there's another model that I really like. This is the Lipid Nostril model for managing complex change. This was introduced to me by another coach, a chap called Mark Kennedy, actually, who may even be on the call. If he is, give me a wave. But I think this is an excellent model for talking about change. And what Lipid Nostril said was that if we have vision and consensus and skills and resources and incentives and an action plan all in place, we'll get a change. If we lack vision, then we're going to get confusion. People won't know what they're aiming at. If we lack consensus, we'll get sabotage. And consensus on this front means they're talking about an agreement on values, ideas, purpose, gaining skills together, expertise together. It's feeling like we're one team. If they don't have the skills, people will be anxious. They'll feel they're being asked to do something that they don't believe they can do. If they don't have the resources, they'll get frustrated. And by resources, that's not just people. That could be whiteboards. That could be the right software. That could be the right development environment. And without them, the people will see what they can do, but won't be able to actually achieve it. Incentives, people need to be incentivized. People will automatically ask, what's in it for me? And we need to make sure that people can see, team members can see what's in it for them when we're going through some kind of change. And finally, an action plan. If we don't have an action plan, if we don't have a view of where we're going by when, we'll simply hit a treadmill and we'll go around in circles. So the reason I highlighted consensus and incentives there in blue is because I'm going to extrapolate them just a little bit more. The others, we simply don't have time to go over at the moment. So incentives, one of the great things, the reason I've thrown this up is that most people, when I say incentives, think about cash, giving people pay rises. And while they are incentives, they're very low level and short-term incentives. I love what I do. And I do a little bit of pro bono work, but I wouldn't be doing my job for free. However, that's not necessarily what incentivizes people. So this guy, Dan Pink, some of you may have heard of, came up with, wrote a book called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And what he said was, there are three things that motivate us. Autonomy, so being able to control your own destiny, control what you're working on. Mastery, getting better at things. People really enjoy getting better at things. Think about somebody who plays golf on their own to lower their handicap, or somebody who learns an instrument. They're not going to make money out of it, but the mastery of those things is something that motivates people. And also purpose, having a sense of direction, a sense of purpose in what they're doing. And that even applies for development teams. Roland, how he was getting great customer feedback. That's purpose, driving something for the customers. And what Dan Pink says is, when you get all these three things together, you hit drive, and that's a real sweet spot in the middle. And leadership has the ability to set that autonomy, that mastery, and that purpose, and that gives people the incentives that they need to do good work. So nudge theory is very interesting. It's something I've been reading about recently. The description at the top is my own paraphrasing from what I've read about it. It's been popular since the mid-90s, I think, but was made particularly popular in 2008 by a book that I can't even remember the author's name at the moment. But basically, it's small changes to the environment to encourage people rather than mandate them to change their behaviours. So, for example, and here's two great examples that you can Google. My London friends will love the one on the left. Footprints. You stand on the right and you walk on the left. Strangely, after living 6 years in London, it still winds me up in Edinburgh. People don't do that. So maybe we should start introducing these footprints up here. The other one is ashtrays. But who's the best player in the world? On the left hand, Ronaldo, on the right hand, Messi. And it's encouraging people to stub their cigarettes out. Can we do similar things? Can leadership use nudge theory for consensus? And I actually think they can. And I think this is one of the keys. So what I see a lot is leadership having, say, a meeting in an office, or writing a report for their senior people, or indeed demanding a report of their junior people. But what if they were just to display some of the behaviours we're asking somebody else? We do this too. We're all in this together. Hold stand-ups. If you're a leadership team, hold a stand-up. Apart from the fact that I think they're of huge value, it will help your staff see and your team see that you're all doing the same thing. Hold retros. Prove that we're all in a learning organisation and leadership wants to learn too. Go to the Gemba. Go to the place where the work is done. The reason there's a picture of a gun there is that I believe the Japanese police force refer to the crime scene as the Gemba, the real place, the place where the work is done. Go and see the work rather than asking for a report to come in. And that will eventually support the behaviours that you're trying to implement. And do it regularly. Remember the porridge. You have to do it regularly. I saw in a recent organisation where the leaders attended one stand-up a month. That's not regularly. You have to be seen to be doing these things. You can nudge by asking the right questions. So, can I have the number? I'm going to pop along to each team's daily stand-up. That will encourage teams to know that the leaders value stand-ups. How did your retro go? Did you manage to squeeze everything into the 2 hours? What about asking these questions? And similarly, my favorite one, I don't know, what do you think? Even when you do know, help people to understand they are being empowered, because that's not easy for people. One of the problems we have is that these things are difficult in the new normal. How many people's meetings look like this nowadays? I know mine do. And it makes demonstrating behaviours even more difficult. So how about have a think about inviting team members to listen in on your stand-ups? I'm not suggesting you invite everybody. That would just be crazy. But invite a couple of people, and then a few days later invite a couple of other people. We have to work harder at demonstrating behaviours when we're in this environment. And asking team members to facilitate a retro. What about that? Ask one of your team members to facilitate a retro for your leadership team. What stronger display could you have that you're encouraging a learning environment for your whole organisation? Bottom line is the goal is achievable. If we change behaviours and sustain the changes, we can turn the tanker and change the culture. The culture will change anyway as the behaviours are reinforced. Don't forget the porridge. Okay. Any questions? Hello.
Thank you, Mark, for that. Sorry about the delay.
No, that's all right. After a horrible word, I thought you did that.
I'll just pass on to Roland first. Do you have any questions for Mark that you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I got a couple of notes here actually. So you mentioned about people saying, "Oh, I don't have 2 hours to spend on a retro." I wonder if it's due to the fact that people sometimes don't see the value. Like I've been in organisations where retros are just big sessions of complaining, but then nothing actually concrete actually happens as an action. And is this a perception when people are saying things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Scottish word for crying is greeting, and we have a phrase up here that retros turn into a greeting meeting. And basically, you're absolutely correct. They need to be well facilitated, and they need to be encouraged. I think if you can't have an achievable task come out of your retro, then something's wrong. But only 1 or 2 per sprint or short period of time. Otherwise, you end up not going after them. I would recommend maybe a couple of achievable targets for change coming out of every retro, even if that's going for a pizza together or having a virtual coffee, as Shabir mentioned.
Yeah. And I just have one thing that was really interesting was you mentioned team members facilitating a retro for leadership.
Yeah.
So you've seen that actually happen, is it?
I did in one organisation. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you who it was, but yeah, they did. They brought it in. I think it only happened once, but I think that was due to the leadership backing off having retros rather than the event itself. But the great publicity from team members, they just thought it was fantastic that the leaders were inviting them into the fold and mimicking those behaviours.
It's really interesting. I might actually talk about that tomorrow.
Yeah, cool.
So yeah, it's interesting.
Great stuff.
Shabir, do you have a question to ask to Mark?
Yeah, one of the things I think you said right near the beginning was just around getting your leadership teams to understand this isn't a finite journey. There isn't an end state, and it's a continuous thing. And obviously, you mentioned around the kind of repetition and the nudges and so forth. But is there any tips and tricks you could give right at the beginning? Because quite often a leadership team might see this as a fixed time, fixed budget, or the scope type of program. And that's often the challenge. Like they've got a very clear plan already predetermined in their head. Any tips and tricks around how to get over that?
Wow, that's a good one. Thanks for that.
Because I've seen it.
Yeah, so I think it's about helping the leaders understand that what they're looking for is adaptability and learning rather than an end state where they have small teams working in sprints. That doesn't benefit anybody. It's the ability. I think one of the challenges is that the leadership frequently looks for a manual on Agile, and it's reminding them that as much as I'm trying really hard not to say the word mindset, but it kind of is. It's a way of changing the culture. So. And if you can get them to understand that early, well, tell me how you did it, please.
I haven't. I think it is. I think it's very much kind of stuff like you've said. It's that continuous journey and really continuous reminding them with the behaviors, repetition, nudges, and everything that you've said. It is. I don't think there's any answer to just do this one thing at the beginning and you've changed their mindset. I don't think there is.
So the number of times I hear or I see leadership basically displaying values where they're saying teams over there, they're doing Agile, we're not. Or we want everybody else to change, but we don't have to. One of the challenges that you have, particularly in large organizations, is that almost none of the leadership have got to the place they are now by exhibiting the kind of behaviors we're suggesting to them. They've got to their senior places by meeting project deadlines, writing good reports, commanding people, command and control, that kind of thing. So that's difficult because you have to find for them what's in it for them too, right?
Yeah, I think just like to share actually one way that I did manage to get by in a certain situation was actually kind of siloing and ring fencing an area off, and just trying to work in a very agile manner there, and proving the success over there to the leadership team, so they can actually visibly see, we've made these changes, this is what the impact has been, this is the success that it's brought it to the teams. And that's why we would like to essentially do that on a wider scale, and that's the kind of culture environment that we really want to bring to the rest of the company as well. I've definitely had one scenario where we've managed to do that.
Yeah, that's
so
true. Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just before we finish, just got a few questions from the audience. So Helen asks, maybe a slightly broad question for you to answer here, but where do you start with culture change?
So I think this is the point. I don't actually think you can change culture. I think you can change behaviors, and culture will change itself. So where I would start with culture change is by saying, let's put a small team together rather than a big team of testers, a big team of developers, and a big team of analysts. Let's put one small team together and just prove that the model works. And there's nothing I've seen drive success better than success. If you put one single team together and you start successfully producing value for the customer, that will begin to shift how people think about producing that value for the customer, and culture will change as a result. Sorry, that was a bit more long-winded than I expected.
And we've got another question from Andy. He says, you spoke a great deal about the change in the way things are done, but not really mentioning how people think about what they do. How does the thinking element come into play?
I don't know that I understand the question, sorry. The thinking element of people in teams. I'm gonna talk about that because I'm really not sure, Andy. But if you can contact me through this and elaborate, I'm happy to answer a different question if I'm on the wrong tack. In terms of how people think about delivering their work, that is difficult. If you can get people who are at least willing to attempt a change, it's kind of back to success. It's back to this. The mastery side of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If suddenly you've got a small team of people delivering something where they would normally take months and months to deliver anything of value, that learning that they get from that can really encourage them to do more of it. And that's what I've seen. Sometimes you're having to just beg them to go with you for a little while. But if you can then suddenly be successful, that drives it, and that then becomes something that you can expand on. I hope that helps, Andy, but feel free to try and get in touch after this.